Build my home on hollow ground. Too proud to grow from my roots.
Hi, this is Craig Smith with a new podcast about artificial intelligence. I'm a former New York Times correspondent now focused on AI, and I'll be talking to the people who are making a difference in the space. I was recently in Stockholm at this year's ICML, the International Conference on Machine Learning, and had a few conversations with Misha Bilenko, the head of AI at Yandex, which is often described as the Google of Russia. I found much of what Misha had to say enlightening and hope you do too. We started talking about the role of state actors in artificial intelligence research and the many national AI strategies that have been announced. Vladimir Putin famously said last year that whoever becomes the leader in AI will rule the world. I asked Misha whether he saw AI research in national terms and whether there is a risk of an AI arms race.
Cross it to find your synthetic light.
I think in the research field, people don't think in terms of national strategies, given how communal and international the field is. If you look at the makeup of researchers in terms of current affiliations and then affiliations of their educational paths and the origins, everyone has moved around so much, and the things they care about are typically in the scientific field rather than in some sort of policy field, that I think it's easy to think of anecdotes or think of basically come up with stories about national strategies, but that exists in a separate realm from the technical field where what people care about is algorithms, where people generally are very eager to collaborate and they have friends and colleagues from all over the world. And they've worked with people from all over the world in the past, and now they're working with people from all over the world in the present, and in the process, they are moving all around the world. So it is a very cosmopolitan community, and that's where any sort of rhetoric that exists in the political sphere of national strategies is really just does not jive and does not belong on the ground here, because it's just not the way people think, and that's not the way they operate. Everybody thinks of it in terms of the technical problems we have and the challenges and the algorithms and the progress going forward. And then the general kind of assumption is that everybody is here to push science and technology further.
And there is no Russian, quote-unquote, AI or American, quote-unquote, AI. I mean, everything is being published in open forums, everything significant, other than perhaps military applications, but very little of that is basic research.
Again, I know nothing about military applications. I never worked on military applications. But in the venues themselves are international. So ICML moves from continent to continent every year by design. Everything that's interesting gets published in the core conferences, ICML, NIPS, ICLR. It goes into archive, which is just an internet archive, literally, of scientific work. And because of that, there is no kind of, like I said, there's people don't even think of national, security and policy in the same realm as the technical work. It just exists in a whole separate sphere of technical achievement and algorithmic excellence and science.
The significance then of these national strategies that are being published are simply to build up a national cohort of competent researchers and engineers so that each country that has a national strategy feels that it's got a stake in the game.
The way I think of it is that if you look at the pipeline of science, it starts with education. And basically, you need to fund certain professors and labs and directions to make sure that you have, experts being educated in those fields. And then those experts can go on and become academics or found companies and then create businesses and create technologies. And so in that sense, I view it as an economic question, is that if there's so much economy that is being transformed by AI, the implication of that is that for every economy to progress, it is essential to create experts in the fields that are the fields of the future. And so that's where it's a vital economic imperative for every technically advanced country to have academic pipelines that prepare people. And so as a result, since academic pipelines are typically funded by governments, therefore governments must fund and must adjust their spending priorities to fund those fields. And that's where I don't view it through the lens of security at all. I view it through the lens of technology and economics first and foremost.
Yeah. And we were talking before about how many competent scientists there are in the field globally right now, and it's anywhere from 20 or 30,000 to 200,000, but it still remains a relatively small number.
It
right?
really depends on where you draw the line between scientists and engineers and say data scientists, because they straddle both worlds. They're as much analysts and scientists as they are engineers. Hundreds of thousands sounds right. But again, it very much depends on where you draw the bar in terms of what makes one.
Yeah. Do you have any sense of where Russia stands in that vis-a-vis China and the United States in terms of numbers of?
It's definitely high. I mean, if you look, Russia, just like China, again, this is where the distinction by states is not as relevant anymore, because if you look at names or sort of from which you could infer ethnic origin, you'll see, of course, lots of Russian names and lots of Chinese names. But at the same time, if you look at the affiliations, people are all over the place. And likewise, they'll see some non-Russian or non-Chinese names being affiliated with Russian or Chinese institutions. So that's where there's definitely a high presence, of Chinese scientists, of Russian scientists. But there is definitely a global ecosystem of everybody moving around and and really collaborating.
Yeah.
So that's where it's not as much of a national issue.
So the public perception of there being sort of arms race in AI is mistaken or is a misnomer?
I think it's a misnomer. I don't think it's it's a very kind of competitive and very antagonistic view of the world. I think now it's if one sort of tends to view the world this way, they certainly can. But I think it's not the way anybody in the field views it, or most people in the field wouldn't view it. Most people in the field view it much more in terms of areas you work on, and then in terms of collaboration, everybody collaborates with everybody. So there's not that arms race implies hard competition and hard distinctions, and that's not the case where it's a very much a collaborative enterprise for everybody.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about AI safety as the systems become more generalized, and also as the militaries start looking at military applications. Are you optimistic about there being international conventions that different countries will adhere to?
Again, I'm not an expert in this, but I'm generally optimistic. So I certainly, as a person, I certainly view it as with any other new technology, it will have applications in military as in other areas. And then it's up to basically both the community and the ruling bodies and of all flavors, state and non-state, to come up with regulations and policies that are required to basically prevent gross misuses of the technology. So I think it will certainly emerge, and there's certainly awareness of potential harms of technology. But just like with everything else, from lasers to semiconductors, it will basically develop as we get more cases that really set the boundaries of what is okay and what's not okay.
Are there areas that you feel either Yandex or Russia generally are ahead on in either research or application? We talked before about some lack of the kinds of constraints that exist on the chatbots in the U.S.
There's not really, they're not hard constraints, right? So I think the key question is that whether we've been able to go forward at a much more rapid pace. And that's one area where we have been moving very fast. And at this point, in terms of AI being in products, we are ahead of the other companies. The fact that our personal assistant includes both the pre-programmed intents, things about asking about weather, for example, or asking about, facts, or asking it to play music, as well as the general, what's known as chit chat, where it can converse on any topic whenever the user wants to just talk to a bot. And so that's something that no other large-scale personal assistant has deployed. If you look at Siri, if you look at Google Assistant, if you look at Alexa or Cortana, let's say the big four of the personal assistants, they all have those hardwired intents, and then they have some pre-edited phrases for certain common requests, such as greetings, for example, or some Easter eggs. But none of them have a true AI sequence-to-sequence engine that is, whenever the user just wants to chat, will chat back on always and try to be relevant. And we definitely have gotten quite a bit ahead of everybody, first of all, because we have it out. We have now millions of users using it. We have it being used across many surfaces in the phones, and desktops, in cars, and now in a smart speaker. Also, if you look at the core metrics of quality, such as relevance, that's where we have made a lot of progress on relevance, which is why people actually do it, is because they're able to get pretty, what they view as snappy, interesting answers that actually are not silly. So,
and that's a learning system. So is it continually improving?
We definitely are learning from user feedback, and as people talk to it, there's plenty of cues, such as, well, if somebody was talking for longer, if they were engaged, that's a good sign. And so we definitely are continually improving the system. In terms of the system changing itself there's multiple ways in which it can learn what's known as online. And that's where it gets very tricky, because we've seen in the past where some of the experiments with true online learning can lead to the system basically being corrupted, or the system can be exploited or trolled. And so that's where we're very careful to make sure that this evolution of the system is not basically making it worse, or it cannot be exploited to start producing, saying terrible things.
And you have this function, Ask Pushkin. Yeah.
Yes.
Can you talk about that? Is that a hardwired intent, or is that?
So it's a third-party intent. Actually, that's one of the things we have is that, like the other major platforms, we have a third-party skills platform where basically anybody, whether it's a pizza delivery service, can come in and say, hey, you can now ask Alice is the name of our assistant, to order pizza. Or, you can ask, for example, like Reebok made a personal training dialogue system that they're shipping through Alice. So talk to Pushkin. So talking to a poet, or Pushkin, who is the most famous Russian poet of all time, is a third-party skill. So we actually don't know the specific details. It is definitely amusing. It's hard to say whether it's, Pushkin has produced such an amazing body of work that it's very easy to always find a relevant phrase, or it's the folks at Arzamas who produce the skill have done such a good job on matching that it actually does give you fairly good poetic advice most of the time. But we're very happy that Alice can be also a pathway to talk to the famous dead poets.
What's the company that produced it?
So Arzamas, they produced some very interesting content in Russian in the past. They produce podcasts as well that are about science, about technology. They're a great production shop. So we're very glad to host them on the platform as well.
Yeah. What are some of the other areas of research that you're focused on?
So if you look at the core applications of AI there's the ones that everybody hears about is vision, speech, both synthesis, and speech understanding, speech recognition. There is also machine translation. Machine translation is especially essential to us because obviously there's a lot of content out there in English. And then because we're based in Russia and most of our users are Russian speaking, for them, we view it as a really core mission for us to basically make all the information out there available to them in the language that they understand best. Translation is where we have made a lot of progress in recent couple of years, and that's where the quality is actually really high, and we appreciate that we hear from users quite a bit, and we're actively integrating it in multiple products, like our browser, for example. In all of these applications, though, if you look at vision, there is really cool new applications like super resolution, where we're able, using neural networks, to make the image basically higher resolution and much prettier. And you can do this with everything from TV channels that you're streaming to old movies that you can now show in much better quality. And then just core image search, which is improving really fast. And now besides image search, you can do things like detection of certain objects. So there's lots of applications there. And then in speech, of course, in dialogue, there is a ton of exciting stuff happening with both the core quality going up and the error going down, where people are just now much more likely to make queries and to use voice because it's just being recognized correctly, to the production of speech, text-to-speech, becoming much more natural sounding. We've been working on that very heavily. There's been a lot of public recognition of progress in English that Google and DeepMind have done in recent years. But besides that, I think one thing that is also changing there rapidly is that a lot of the time when we're dictating, we use not just sort of common dictionary words, but we'll use proper names, or we'll use even names that are personal to us, like say names from the address book. And then those systems becoming aware of basically being personalized and becoming the speech recognition, recognizing not just, the literary text, but all sorts of, strange names you may have in your address book, or, the difficult proper names of, say, restaurants. That's definitely a kind of a core area in which improvement has been very strong. And that's what has been driving the systems of becoming more widely used and very helpful. So in machine translation, just to show an example of how collaboration in the scientific sense is happening in the technology sense, is that there is a topology of neural networks known as transformer that was invented by Google scientists. And we've basically taken it and then built on top of it, improving both the topology, but also the larger system within it, to really dramatically improve the quality of translation. And so, and getting the quality of English to Russian and Russian to English translation dramatically in the past year. And now the same quality increases propagating to other directions for translation.
And on the computer vision, this improving video quality is using NVIDIA's extrapolation.
So we use NVIDIA for the cards, but the networks are entirely our own. So that's something that our teams have basically, they read all the literature, but the core nets that are being used, that's something that actually we're very proud of our team coming up with through lots of experimentation.
Yeah. And we also talked last time a little bit on your view of artificial general intelligence. I mean, it's the topic everybody likes to talk about.
Well, I think it's what is general intelligence keeps shifting in public view, because things that become commonplace, they're no longer as dramatically exciting as they used to be. And so I think in that sense, if we look at assistants and what they do in terms of they're able to basically help with a variety of tasks, they're able to provide information, and now we're getting to a point where we're able to also just have small talk with us routinely. The most stringent definitions of general intelligence will also go beyond what the system can do towards what is inside it, and there you define it as having much higher capacity, reasoning capabilities, for example. But an alternative view is saying, like, well, no matter what happens inside, as long as it can give you relevant and good answers, whether it can be trivialized as just search and pattern matching, even though done by very powerful algorithms and networks, but still, is that intelligent or not? I mean, there's a famous Chinese room argument which crystallizes this paradox of, like, well, do you care about what comes out, and is it intelligent, or is it really what goes inside that defines what intelligence implies? And so I think there is a continual improvement in terms of the quality of what comes out. But there is when people discuss general intelligence, a lot of the time they also focus on the fact that there needs to be much higher order processes inside. That's as much an engineering task as much as it is a scientific challenge. So that's where there's going to be, there's lots of remaining challenges and continual progress. At the end of the day, it just comes down to better answers and better services.
Thanks, Misha, for your time. That's all for this episode. Those of you who want to go into greater depth about the things we talked about today can find a transcript of the show in the program notes. Let us know whether you find the podcast interesting or useful, and whether you have any suggestions about how we can improve. The singularity may not be near, but AI is about to change your world. Pay attention.
No, I can't get close till I buy my time.